Hope you're all enjoying your day thus far. I'd like to welcome you all today to the wonderful and fantabulous Vineland Historical and Antiquarian Society. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Show some love. The Society is honored and excited to present a poetry presentation and workshop with Rebecca Bonham. Bonham, a lifelong resident of the county, is a dedicated disciple of the literary arts and has worked diligently to help people find strength and comfort in the power of words. Are you still running your monthly poetry event?
It is actually starting again on November, so it'll be third Saturday in November.
So, Rebecca is once again running a successful, highly regarded monthly poetry event called Resurgence.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to be at Bogart's?
It's at Bogart's.
Okay.
And it's every third Saturday. I keep wanting to say Sunday, but third Saturday, and it's from 12 to 3.
Go ahead. See, that's how we give the information out in real time. Rebecca is also co-owner of independent publishing company Blue Jade Press LLC with her longtime friend Jacqueline Grant. The talented Rebecca has also written a poetry book called Model Poet, which she'll talk a little bit about today. On a personal note, I've known this woman for about 20-something years. We met through mutual friends, and our paths have crossed numerous times since then. She is one of the kindest and bravest people I know. And now, I have the awesome honor to introduce to you my friend, / awesome writer, / poet, / entrepreneur, / survivor, / amazing human being, / okay, I'll just stop right there. Introducing Rebecca Bonham.
I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm sure that a lot of people know me from different areas in my life. I have lived in Cumberland County. I won't say Vineland for the entirety of my life, but was born in Bridgeton, and I grew up in Hopewell, and I went to Cumberland Regional High School. A few years ago, I also went to school with my best friend and co-owner, Jacqueline Grant. She was a big part of starting Blue Jade Press. We are based in Vineland, so we are a Vineland business as well. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'll give you my resume. Like I said, I graduated in Cumberland Regional High School in 1994. I've worked various jobs in different fields. I've worked as a nurse's aide, I worked as an insurance claims adjuster, I worked as a hearing aid dispenser for 15 years. All of these jobs, what did I gravitate to? Stories. I worked nights at the hospital, and patients would be up at night, and I would sit and talk to them all night, understanding about their fears, their cares, their family. I worked at Miracle Beer, a place that people love to tell stories. They love to have conversations. They love to speak to somebody that has the time and the ability to communicate with them. I know so much about World War II that I could probably write my own book about it. And it happened way before my father was even. Actually, both of my grandfathers were in World War II. My one grandfather was in the army in France, and my other grandfather was in the British Navy. Now, growing up, we always thought that he was just a sailor. Come to find out, he was in underwater demolitions, which is like a SEAL. So his job was to, in northern Italy, blow up bridges, blow up dams, munition buildings, anything underwater. Now, when I grew up, what I heard was, your grandparents want you to eat an orange before you leave. And your grandfather is going to teach you how to touch the bottom of the pool when you're little so you know how to swim. As a child, I didn't understand that they wanted me to eat oranges because they didn't want me to have scurvy. And he wanted to teach me. And I was taught by a Navy SEAL almost how to dive. That's the more interesting part, in my opinion. So, you know I had a long life in Cumberland County. I'm going to read it, some of it. This is what I want you to know about how I felt at one time about living in Cumberland County alone. Temporary. I lived between two homes, a suitcase every other weekend. I moved 18 times, all within the same county. Possessions are weaknesses and emotion-infused relics, easily broken, unlike will or fortitude, fragility exploited and exposed with glued tracks. Trash bags with necessities shoved in a trunk that symbolizes freedom on 4 ball tires. Remnants that survived my past. What that story was to you was I had divorced parents and I had lived between 2 houses. When I was younger, I always ended up moving, but I always stayed close to home. Why is that? Why did I want to stay in Cumberland County? There were so many opportunities for me to flee. I could have went away to college. My mother lived in 4 different states after I turned 21. Why did I want to stay here? Because of this. I know almost all of you from a different area in my life. And how could I achieve that in a different place? How does knowing many of you from different areas of your life and seeing you come together to listen to me affect me in my life? How does your support me and support my business and support my book and support my emotions? I've gotten so much support from this community that I've been giving back. Growing up, like I said, I had a lot of different experiences, and to know, like I said, I had a lot of death, sibling death in my life. That's one fact. Well, what is the emotion? What is the story? How did a child process that? This is how. Dandelions. As the sunny crowns broke through the frozen ground, an opportunity presented itself. An enterprising 7-year-old with a spade and bucket. And each dandelion cut was a quarter in my pocket. So I set upon the neighbor's yard and freely, delicately freed each one, containing all the early fluff, which in hindsight lessened my profit. I was approached by the neighbor boy, who being 10 was so much wiser and was confused by my industry. He decided on a quicker way and started pulling them from the stems and blowing all the fluff. All the protest just resulted in the smearing of pollen, yellow streaks under my chin. Then came the dare. Of course I was to go first. I had to eat the poisonous blossom, bite and chew the fluff, and after I thought something that tasted that awful must be deadly. And now I'm surrounded by that sickly smell. This day was my last, and I didn't heed the warnings of eating things that grew outside, or of entrusting the intentions of little boys. That night I behaved angelically, kissing my parents goodbye. For tonight, the 7-year-old thought surely she would die. So, that was a lesson that I learned. And also to tell your father if you eat flowers outside. And that dandelions are actually, although they taste really bad, they're okay to eat. graduated Cumberland Regional. I told you that a couple of times. But the underlying story to that, because that's a fact. Now there's a story behind that fact. The boy I graduated next to, I graduated next to him and sat next to him in 8th grade and also senior high school. Why? I have no idea, because we weren't alphabetically aligned. But I will tell you that the first time I ever read in public was at my 8th grade graduation in front of everyone. All of my class, all of the parents. And I read a poem that I wrote for class that said, write a nice poem about Hopewell Township School. So I went blah, 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 it's so great. It might have been, it might have not have been, but I was 13 and things that are great sometimes aren't. But I did remember, and I remembered this boy that I graduated next to. And you probably know him because he's still in town today. But I wrote a poem for him. The boy I graduated next to, 8th grade angst, big dog, hair bands, listening to Beasties and The Cure, classes and field trips, oral reports, air-conditioned Apple IIe. Hot summer days, egg drop physics, poetry assignment, bogus cool spirit, baloney 1, read out loud, everyone, auditorium, freak out, I'm the quiet one. He says, mine's bogus too. 12th grade resignation work in school, clubs, creative writing, turned into adulting classes, home finance, typing, and Pascal. Insecure and too mature to want to party, starting work and life the next day, nothing exciting. Confusion of my classmates cheer, not a new beginning, just what's next. He says, I don't feel it. Do you? I wrote that because I wanted you to see the difference in the maturing from the 8th grade to senior year. That is the difference between facts and emotions. That is the difference between the story behind what you know. I want to talk a little bit about community because it's a very important part of my life. I have been volunteering in different ways and different avenues since I was a child. My first volunteer assignment was to work at a Alzheimer's daycare center in Bridgeton. It was sponsored by the Catholic Church, and as a 9 and 10-year-old, we would go over with my stepmother, and we would spend the day with Alzheimer's patients, playing with them, coloring, enjoying time. After that, my other grandfather was big in the American Legion and baseball. So instead of letting his players reach into big cans of ice water and soda, he had me and my grandmother do it. You know, you couldn't ruin a baseball arm, you know. Then I was an EMT in Upper Deerfield and Bridgeton. I did that for a few years. I've also volunteered at M25 and Code Blue. I've also volunteered at Cares and Shares, which feed homeless people during the pandemic. I've also been a member of the Elks, and I've also am doing Resurgence, which is a monthly poetry workshop and open mic. But what did they do for me? This community allows me to do this. They support me like you folks do. You invite me to do places. But when you ask for favors, you might get asked for favors in return. And that's one of the things that I got asked for in return, was to do Resurgence. Now, I am deathly afraid of public speaking, if you can't tell. I did not get that from him. So what happened with Resurgence is that a dear friend of mine and a lot of you might know her too, is Rita Lynn Lyman. She ran poetry and Bogarts for years before it turned hands, and there was an outcry from the community that wanted it back, and every time I walked into Millville, they go, "Becky, why don't you do it?" And I said, "Well, I'm terrified of public speaking. Why would I ever want to do this?" But sometimes you get voluntold instead of volunteering. And I said, "Well, you're going to help me." And all of my artist friends and musicians and poets and everybody has helped me in some aspect. But the funniest thing is that my friend has a sketch club that he used to do before the pandemic, and his model canceled. And he goes, "Becky, can you model for sketch club?" And I said, "Well, I can sit still and be quiet and do some yoga." I said, "Is that modeling? Maybe." I said, "Who's going to want to draw a 40-year-old woman?" And I said, "And I will have to be clothed because my son does work in town." So me, terrified of public speaking, terrified social anxiety sometimes, especially with people, oh my God, looking at me. Now I'm sit in front of all of these people with easels, and they're drawing, and they're really looking at me. And I'm like, holy cow, what am I going to do? I'm going to write a poem. I'm going to sit here and write a poem in my head, because if I'm writing a poem in my head, then I'm not even concerned what you guys are doing. And that's where I get model poet.
Wow. That's neat.
Thank you. Model poet. Here's the poem. I sit here, exposed and centered in the easels, bubbling deep with deep-seated fears, perfectly still. 10 one-minute poses. For these, I just listen to my body. I feel the fatigue of the exaggerated stretch. I fear feverish sketchings. But the screaming in my limbs that just demands my attention. Relief brings a smile and a chat. I'm a poet. I'm a fill-in. I'm a friend. Then I settle into pose meditations, eyes open, with blurred sight. I wonder, as they draw my lines, my negative space, and they remove my clothing with their pens, do they see the poem that is forming? The poem is what's real. Scribbling, painting, tapping of brushes, a furious soundtrack to which I imagine that they're filling their pages with my poetry, my words, my energy, because the rest is just a shell. And that's how I feel sometimes. I feel like what you see and what you draw or what you think of me, of you, of anyone else, you're looking at the outside. Let's look some more inside. No matter what is going on in your life, if you sit down and write them out, they're a lot easier to deal with on paper than on your head. And we'll go over a quick exercise about that. But I want to read you this one before we do this exercise. Tonight. This night is not unlike many others, and I worry. I worry of things that I said or I didn't say, of how I could have been kinder, better, or more. I believe that I walk through my life invisible, but somehow judged by strangers and found wanting. I struggle with a sense of self and an internal dialogue that reads between the lines that aren't double-spaced. Sorting excitement from anxiety and wondering which one came first. I wrestle for the need of obscurity and for the desire for recognition, fearing and craving both. But tonight is not unlike many others. So in this, I wonder, if it is enough to put ink to pen to paper, to scratch your thoughts hard enough to press them out of my head and out of my soul. That, like I said, is just me trying to connect with you and understanding that you might not be the same, but there's a part of us that still lives in here and in here. How do you start writing poetry? Well, first you have to just write anything at all. And what is the easiest thing to write about? And I'm going to challenge you for this, and I'm going to give you a couple of techniques. The first technique is called stream of conscious writing. And what that is that literally whatever thought passes through your mind within the next 10 minutes or so, I want you to write it down. Keep going. Don't stop writing. Okay? I gave everybody paper and pen.
Yeah.
So what I want you to do is, and if you need a topic, best topics. When was the last time you laughed? What made you laugh the last time? What made you happy? What surprised you? What are you worried about? What are you concerned about? What is going, just anything that's going through your mind. This type of writing can be very therapeutic. This is pretty much, and I'm going to say it kind of disgusting, is word vomit, which means just get whatever you want in and out of your mind and in and out of your head, and put it on a piece of paper. And that, what you have right now, belongs to you, and you can do whatever you want to do with it. You can share it with us, you can share it with yourself, you can share it with family members, you can tear it up and burn it, you can stomp on it, you can do whatever you want. Those are your feelings. They belong to you. Now, if you'd like to refine them, that might be a different way of communicating them. And one of the best ways to do that is what's called the Blackout method. And I know Alma might know a lot about this. She's a very accomplished poet in her life. What you will do is you will take a look at what you've just written and block out, just cross out anything that you don't like now. And what you will end up with should be a poem. But what I wanted to do is give you an example of a poem that's in my book that it has been written, and its origins was in a Blackout poem, and just what I feel, or Blackout, train of thought poem. And it was just emotions that I wrote down, and then I just captured the best of it and put it into a poem, and it's called Solid. You stood above me and compressed me and pressed me to sent your roots to leach divinity as you blossomed and bore fruit. And like I said, that's just a short poem that has very few words, but if you catch it, and I will read it again if I did it a little too quickly. Solid, you stood above me and compressed me and pressed me, sent your roots to leach divinity as you blossomed and bore fruit. Those were just a few words out of a rant. I also want to talk about how changes and things happen, and how where one time you go to a place and then another time it seems like a completely different place. And one of the places that I go to a lot, and it's very synchronistic, I think. The universe is speaking to me, because one of the places that I go to a lot to deal with some of these emotions, to deal with being in lockdown for a pandemic for 2 years, and social distancing, and the news, and all of this, and to get away from my husband because I love him, but he's a lot. He needs a lot more socialization than I do, so when we were working at home, both of us, for 10 weeks, isn't it time for you to go back? But I did visit Shalom Cemetery, and that's where I go. I walk around the paths. I've been doing this since I've moved here 16 years ago. It is a cemetery, but it's also where I've seen children grow up, learning how to ride bikes. I've seen people mourn. I've seen the spectrum of life happen in a cemetery. And I wrote a poem in the beginning of the pandemic, in March of 2020, as I was walking through the cemetery. And then I wrote another one at the beginning of last year, and I wanted you to take a listen and see how they might have been different. A grave spring. I woke to the dropping of pink petals amid the gray stones, woken too soon by the explosions of yellow, underscored by fields of purple. I lie in this place of cold death and sadness, the barest of branches daring to bud by the warming of the false spring sun. I wept when the winds whipped and the broken branches of the willows adding to the dead, believing my place the same. But my shadow no longer shone, but violently tossed against the upturned stones. Your sentiments were skewed. That was what I felt last April of 2020. I felt that everything was askew. Everything, and even my place. I think there was a storm that went by and there was branches. So that was 2020. This is Life is Good at Shalom Summit, written in 2021. Every March I itch, peering hopefully at my forsythia, begging the yellow blooms that say it's okay, it's time, they're ready, they're already here. And when they open today, I went through my 15th spring walk through Shalom Cemetery. Open, dusk till dawn, dawn till dusk. No dogs allowed. I crossed the street and passed the sign, which looks newly painted. I should know because last fall I thought, like me, it was hanging on to the stone pillar that keeps the dead in and the dogs out. Immediately I turned right. The living here have rules, or at least I do. There are stops I must make for the people I've only met after they've ended up here. Alexander is the first. His spirit called to me. When I happened upon his friend, sitting, sobbing in futility, out for a walk, empty hands, asked if I could assist. He needed more matches to light his lantern in memory. So I pulled a lighter from my bra, and I hugged poor Alex's friend and cried with him as it floated away. And now I stop for Alexander and I check in. A quick trip around the loop. There are no children today, learning how to skate and ride with bright helmets and pads and new bicycles and nervous parents. None of that today. This section is sad. This year, I walk solemnly around too many fresh graves. I taught my own Alexander how to ride and later how to drive through the safe and winding paths, pedal through the back part, past the chapel, and in the shade and the shadows past that spooky stone where it's always cold. I wonder if there's buried there. I've seen how much he's grown. Around the chapel to the sunny side, and the dead make themselves known. I find inspiration and poems happen here. And another stop in my determined stride, I like to stand under the dripping blooms of the willow trees. I say hi to Mary, who I only recently found last year. There was a placard outlining her life. She was a publisher and author, as well as a mother and a Civil War soldier's wife. I like to stop and reflect on our similarities, but onto the other side where the serious walkers and runners go. There are rules for the living, and down the long stretch, not even the oak trees grow. Rows and rows of family stones, and this is always the busiest part. I try to avoid the creeping. The final leg, and I start to run. And I always pick my pace before I get to the veteran stones. I like to think when I'm sweaty and winded, I hear them cheer me on. I stop to straighten the fallen flags of those who fell too soon. It's a neutral day at Shalom Cemetery. No laughter or sorrow from the living or from the dead. Just a gift of rebirth and inspiration as I pass through the iron gates. Now I want you guys to tell me a story. I know a lot of you and I know the cover of you, but I want you to tell me a story. Tell me a story that's get told over and over and over in your family. Tell me a story that you joke, that inside joke that you joke about with your friend forever and ever and ever. And I want you to take those stories and I want them to pass them and to write them down and to pass them off to your family members and your friends. I want you to start that written history of who you are. Because if you read my book, and I ask this of every independent author, every publisher, every person I see that has a book, and I will ask them, if I read this book, what poem, what story does that reflect you the most? And in this book, Life is Good is the one that reflects me as a person that I would like to leave for friends, family, and history to know. Because we can come and go. Things that are here forever. Poetry and stories and art and music have always been in my life, and I always sought out a way to encourage that. And through poetry and events like this, I feel like I have the ability to create that environment that I want to keep. And I also have a venue and a forum to kind of give a little bit of my history and the history that I'm only now hearing about at 45 years old. How many of you have older relatives that have died with stories that you have never even known? I didn't know that my grandfather was underwater explosions. Unless I specifically asked my father, what did he do in the Navy? I wouldn't have gotten that story. And what I want to do is start asking these questions to our older family members and hopefully start writing these things down for ourselves. Because I've learned something even more. Because then I started asking my dad about his grandparents. And that's where I got this poem from. Inherited. I come from Lions, a lineage of trials and endurance. A midwife left Wales and married an English businessman who believed in trains and planes and mail and supplies to Ireland. And he also liked pretty secretaries. And he brought home one to live with his wife. And when she railed against moving his mistress in, he had her committed to the sanitarium. But I come from Lions, and as did she, and she persevered until the short, fragile peace between the warring worlds. And she won her own divorce. Lions do not belong on trains or planes or caged in sanitariums, so she returned to Wales to continue her midwifery and lived a life of solitude until she finally won her personal war of tenacity, and she passed away aged 103. Thank you. So, when you write your personal stories, you don't have to say it all, but you can understand the history from this. You can understand when it happened, how it happened. You can understand the conditions, the societal conditions that allowed this to happen. Those things are the facts. That story is the story. That poem is the story. So when you take these facts into consideration and you write them in a way that makes people able to connect to these facts, that helps move stories, keeps history fresh and people wanting to read it and wanting to share it over and over and over again. Because a lot of people just mentioned a lot of good poets that are still around, not physically, but they're still around and their stories are still being told. So why can't that be be each and every one of you. And it doesn't have to be told by the world. It can be told by your great-great-great-granddaughter. Or by a feisty redhead whose great-grandma was a midwife. I'm wondering how rich she should. But it was a pleasure to talk to you all today, and I hope you got a few writing exercises and ideas and things. If anybody has any questions or concerns, or if you want to just talk.
I have one question.
Sure.
Where can people find your book?
My book is available on Amazon. Also, too, it's available at the RRCA in Noble, and also at the Octopus Garden at the Village at Noble on High Street.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Or you can contact me via Facebook or Instagram.
Perfect.
Or at our website, bluejpress.com.
Very nice. Thank you.